So today we have a pretty special comparison. We have this one here, the Femobook A05, and this one over here, the Millab E01. So both of these grinders are battery operated grinders, and I have to say, for me, it's the first time I'm experiencing this type of grinder. I never really had any interest in them. It just seems like such a niche product. I mean, it's pretty easy to plug in a grinder into the socket and just use regular electricity. On the other hand, manual grinders have also come a really long way, and they're just like really useful now. So first of all, I reviewed the big Femobook last year, the one behind me, this one here. And as you can see, this is a pretty big boy compared to this cute little Femobook here. So I actually had a lot of fun with the Femobook last year. I was pretty impressed by it. And when they reached out to me and asked if I was interested in trying the new product, I didn't hesitate, because I thought there would probably be some interesting innovations going on. And it turns out one of them is that this is battery operated. The grinder is very similar to the original Femobook. The burr is a little bit smaller, and as you can see, the footprint is a lot more tiny. Then the next thing that happened was that a brand named Millab slid into my DMs and asked if I was interested in trying their new product, a battery operated conical grinder that was going to be launched as a crowdfunding project. Actually, the crowdfunding is going on as we speak. Once again, I was kind of skeptical, but then I saw this video about a guy named Coffee Man. I'm not really sure if he's a hero or a villain, some kind of evil James Bond coffee brewing character, and his friend Dr. G, and then I got a little bit more curious about what was up with this startup.
There was a mysterious figure called Coffee Man. Wherever he went, he left behind exceptional coffee with no trace. No one had ever seen Coffee Man, but every time he appeared, he left some coffee, a message, and a mysterious symbol. Coffee nerd Dr. G collected every clue available to find out who Coffee Man is and his secrets. At the cafe.
At first, Millab claimed that they were a startup just working with Time More, collaborating on some parts, and sourcing their conical burr for the grinder. It's actually similar to the one used in Time More is Free, the new flagship manual grinder. But then the tune kind of changed a little bit, and Time More admitted that yes, Millab is actually a brand within the Time More organization. So it is a kind of interesting development. It's called Millab, but it is a Time More product. And then all of a sudden, the Femobook also seemed a lot more interesting, because you don't have to be Sherlock Holmes or even Dr. G to see that this grinder is quite similar in many ways to the design that ESPRESSO uses. And many of the details inside the grinder, how the burr is held in place, the adjustment, it's just lifted straight out of the ESPRESSO catalog. At the same time, this brand is also from Taiwan, and the rep who contacted me about it used to work for ESPRESSO. So after the experience with this grinder here, I also started to wonder more and more whether Femobook could actually be a sub-brand of ESPRESSO. And in these modern times where proxy wars and false flag operations suddenly seem to have come into play again, it's kind of interesting that we might have the same thing going on in the grinder world. We have Time More and ESPRESSO each battling it out in the battery operated grinder space under different names. It's certainly an intriguing scenario. So the Femobook A05 is a very interesting grinder. It's well made in many ways. It's so similar to the previous model we saw from the brand. They have just shrunken it down into an even smaller form factor, which is really nice because it doesn't take up much space on the kitchen table. When you turn it around this way, you can also see that it's very slim. So depending on how you're going to put it on your kitchen counter, it won't take up that much space. As with the previous Femobook, it does use some magnets here in the bean funnel, and also in the catch cup it's held in place with magnets. But this time they are using a slightly different design. So you just have to twist the body of the grinder like so, and then it just pops out, and then it's pretty easy to clean. Also, new thing, they got some interesting small brushes here that are fixed to the conical burr. So as it spins around, these brushes will try to get rid of any grounds that are stuck here due to static. This brush is also held in place with magnets, so probably you can get a new one if it ever wears out. Besides that, it's an incredibly simple grinder. You just have an on and off button here, and then you have a USB-C plug at the backside, so you can recharge the grinder. One thing I'm really happy to see on this model here is that the Femobook name, the branding is a little bit more discreet than it was on the previous grinder. I still think Femobook is kind of a strange name for a grinder, but at least it's not so obvious here. You also have this kind of matte black color. So overall, the grinder will look quite discreet in your kitchen. Of course, the adjustment is located here, and you have small clicks in typical ESPRESSO fashion. And all these clicks are very, very fine, very granular. So this means that you will have to use quite a wide range. If you're going to go from, say, espresso to drip coffee, you'll have to go more than one rotation. So it can be quite difficult to keep track on where you are on this grinding wheel here. The Millab is actually even more simple than the Femobook. So you just have an on and off button here on the front. There's a little light indicating whether the grinder needs to be recharged or whether it's running. And then again on the back you have a USB-C plug. You take off the lid here, and then you just load in your beans. And this is a pretty nice experience. The opening is quite wide, so it's easy to load your beans. Then it has this set of fins here, so the beans are not going to popcorn, but they can fall down quite easily. The catch cup is held in place by magnets, so you just pull it like this, and then it's open. It's a bit of a wide catch cup, which is fine if you're grinding for drip coffee, but for espresso I've had some accidents where it's easy to tilt it a little bit to the side, and then all the grounds are going to fall out because it's not the highest catch cup. So there's just that to be aware of. And then down here you have a typical internal manual grinder adjustment mechanism. So again, it's very intuitive and straightforward. I've been grinding drip coffee around setting 14, 13, and then espresso is usually at the finest settings around 2. So this system is very intuitive to use, and Timemore has even given you some directions here, so you know what kind of range you should be at. This is just a nice package, very simple, minimalist, but the material feels good in the hand, and it's also quite a bit lighter than the Femobook. As I said, I was grinding a lot of espresso at setting 1, quite close to the 0 point, and you might have some trouble if you're into this modern fast flow basket, light roast kind of crazy espresso. Then you probably shouldn't get this grinder here, but you probably already know that. So just be aware that it's better suited for something more medium to dark. Okay, but now let's grind some coffee, both for espresso and drip coffee, and then do some tests so we can see how fast the grinders are, how noisy they are, and how they just work in daily life. So I measured out 15 grams of beans, and now I'm going to load it into the Millab, and then we'll see how fast it is on an espresso setting. So just to warn you, this grinder is very slow when it comes to espresso grinding. So I'll show you a little bit of how it works and sounds, and then I'll speed it up in the editing, so you don't have to watch the whole thing. And now I'm just going to press start. Okay, and now the grinder stopped by itself. Let's just check if there's not any beans still stuck in the grinder. So I'm just going to start it. Yeah, there was still a little bit. Okay, and now it stopped for the second time. Let me just shake it a little bit and make sure we really got everything ground. Yeah, there's still a little bit of extra. So this is something I've seen before in my testing period. And that is, especially on espresso settings, it's not getting all beans in the first go. So when you can hear it starting to slow down and it doesn't really have any beans, then it's a good idea to just shake it a little bit so you make sure that all the beans are fed into the burrs. And I put in around 15.1 something in that range, and then let's see how much is coming out now. Okay, and it actually looks very nice. There's not a lot of static on the burrs and the grounds. Smells good. Let's dump it in. And we have 15 grams coming out. So I will say this is pretty much as expected. In theory, this is a manual grinder, so the retention is going to be very similar, which means that it's kind of a zero retention grinder. If you're experiencing some inconsistencies here, then it's probably because not all the beans have been loaded into the burrs, because when it comes to the grinding path and the chute, there's not really anywhere the grounds can get stuck. And as we just saw, static is also not a significant concern. So it should give you a pretty consistent reading when it comes to retention. Okay, next up is the Femobook A05. And we're also going to grind the same amount on ESPRESSO setting. Okay, and now the grinder detected there were no beans left, so it auto-stopped, but it should be stopped at around 51 seconds. And let's just restart it and shake it. Yeah, this one actually got everything, unlike the Millab. It hasn't really been a big problem with the Femobook. It usually gets everything the first time around. And now let's try to weigh it and see. Okay, oh, here we have a lot more static now. So I'm just going to knock it a few times. It's quite obvious. You can use RDT, and that is probably going to help the performance quite a bit. Of course, it also depends on the grind setting and the types of beans you're using. Okay, tear the scale. And we have 14.9 here in the cup. Probably, I can see there's a little bit spilled down here and around the scale. So it's important. Maybe just lift up your Femobook and give it a little bit of a knock, because even though it has these wipers around, especially with dark roast on ESPRESSO setting, it can be a little bit tricky. Another interesting thing is that the Femobook is also quite a bit more noisy than the Millab, and I think it's got to do both with the design and the motor, and also how fast the RPM actually is of the grinder. So as you saw, this grinder is quite a bit faster, and the Millab, on the other hand, I think it actually runs at a slower speed than what most people do when they are using a manual grinder. So this one here, according to Femobook, is running at around 60 RPM. So 60 rotations per minute, that's 1 per second. That's probably similar to what most people are doing when they are using a manual grinder. The Millab, on the other hand, it appears to be quite a bit slower. I'll show you some footage and then you can judge for yourself. But I guess there are both pros and cons of the speed. You get a faster grinder here, but on the other hand, the Millab is also significantly more quiet. As we saw with the decibel test meter here, the Femobook scored a lot higher than the Millab. So the Millab is actually more quiet than some manual grinders would be. Most manual grinders, it's a little bit more quiet than those. When it comes to battery operated grinders, of course, the battery life is an important factor, and I've been pretty impressed with both the grinders. This one here has a slightly bigger battery than the Millab, but actually, according to the brand, this one is supposed to last for a lot more grinding sessions than this one is. Femobook is a little bit more vague about it on their website, and they say that when it's fully charged, it can grind 30 to 50 times. I guess they're probably referring to ESPRESSO here. And Millab is a lot more optimistic in their outlook, and they say that this grinder here can grind 130 times for drip coffee, 15 grams each, and it can grind 30 doses of 20 grams of espresso. I haven't put these claims to the test, but I just noticed that it's been quite rare that I needed to recharge the grinder. So of course I already have an electric scale on my brewing station, which I have to charge once in a while. And I would imagine it would be the same thing if you have one of these grinders here. It's just something you have to do, I don't know, every 3 or 4 weeks, depending on how much coffee you're drinking. To be honest, I didn't feel like grinding 5 kilos of coffee just to find out whether these claims are true. But there is one other review here on YouTube from our coffee shelter. I'll put a link to it down below, where the guy actually tries to test it. And what he found out is that it's pretty similar to what Timemore says. Both grinders can go through quite a bit of coffee before they need to be charged. Okay, and now let's just brew some drip coffee and talk about the flavor differences. And I'm gonna start them at the same time. I have 8 grams in each, so it's a small serving. And it's done. And a bit more. Okay, and done. And I got 2 very similar drawdowns. Let's try it out. Sweet, nice, sweet, balanced. Yeah, and this just tastes very much like what I've been experiencing in all the testing period, and that is when you first sip the Millab, the coffee just tastes very sweet and balanced, and you feel like this is actually a very nice coffee. But then you drink the Femobook, and then it's just apparent that that heptagonal burr that just adds a lot of fun to the cup. This is a BREW design that is very popular. It's used in a lot of grinders nowadays. In the beginning it was just in the Comandante, but then the ESPRESSO K series came along, and now I think actually several grinders are using this burr set on one that's very similar. And even though this is a bigger burr than the typical heptagonal burr, it still has that same flavor profile. So it's a burr set that just adds a little bit of a pleasant sharpness to the cup. The Millab burr set is quite solid. I was quite pleased with it, and I think it's probably the best burr set I've tried for Timemore so far. But overall, when I compare the 2 cups, I usually tend to gravitate more to this one here, and it also appears like the Femobook can handle a bit more of a higher extraction. Sometimes I've tried to push the Millab burr closer to the Femobook, grind a little bit finer to extract more flavors, but then you do get more harshness and astringency earlier on. When it comes to espresso, I will say that the Femobook performs pretty much like you would expect from the heptagonal burr set that is inside it. So a little bit sharp, not the biggest body, but definitely enjoyable. The Millab, on the other hand, it's a little bit more sweet, a little bit more rounded. It's still not a big body, so I wouldn't call it a traditional conical espresso profile, but it's still an enjoyable kind of average shot. So if you're drinking dark or medium dark roast, I think you'll be quite happy with this one. This one can also do the job, but it probably shines more at more medium roasts, longer ratios, kind of a bit more modern espresso. So to wrap it up, I think both these grinders are very successful in terms of what the company wanted to do. They set out and they kind of have achieved the goal. You have a very good battery life. You can grind for both filter coffee and espresso. And overall, the user experience is pretty good. One thing I really like about both of the grinders is the build quality, the materials and the design. It just feels very modern, very well made, and I like this Blad Mag aesthetic. It fits in perfectly with the rest of my coffee station. The main downside for me as a reviewer is that I'm probably not the right person to review it. I don't really understand what is the purpose of a battery operated grinder. Is it a travel grinder? Well, in that case, 2.6 kilos for the Femobook. I'm probably not gonna bring that on any trip anytime soon. I like to travel just with carry-on luggage if I'm going on a plane, and 2.6 kilo, well, that's almost half of my baggage allowance, so I'm not going to bring that one. The Millab at 1 kg, well, it's a lot lighter, so I think there's a bigger chance I would bring this one here. But on the other hand, I often get DMs from people who don't feel comfortable hand grinding. Maybe they have arthritis or something like that, and they just don't want to be cranking a handle in the morning. Well, in that case, if you're kind of a traveler and you want to bring something with you, then maybe the Millab would be a good idea. Another thing that I hear quite frequently is that people want a very quiet grinder, and again, I think the Millab did really well here. When I measured the sound, the decibel, actually it's a little bit lower than most hand grinders even, so it's a very quiet grinder. Many people also want a compact grinder, one that doesn't take up much counter space in the kitchen, and I guess you could also say that it's nice to have grinders that don't use an electrical socket all the time, because that means you can have more appliances plugged in. So if that's you, again, this is a plus for this type of grinder. Personally, I like to have my grinder plugged in when I'm at home. I like bigger grinders, and as you might already have figured out, grinders are a big part of my life, so it's not a big problem. But I'm also curious to hear what you think about products like this. Would it have a place in your coffee collection? Let me know down in the comment section. Oh, and if you have made it this far and you don't have any comments or questions, then you can let me know if you're rooting for Coffee Man or Dr. G down in the comment section. I'll be curious to know who's your favorite. I guess that's it for today, and I will see you in another coffee video very soon.